Hey, thanks for joining me today for this episode of Curves Welcome, a podcast about facing and embracing the curves of life. If this is your first time tuning in, this is Susie Carr. Hello, today on Curves Welcome, I welcome a very special guest, my friend and fellow author, David Walford. He is from the UK and he is the author of Ribbons and the upcoming Finding Mercy. And I was lucky enough to be his beta reader for both of them. And I had a great time reading them both. And I know that you will all enjoy it as well when you sink into these two books, because they are just told with such grace and humor and just wonderful, wonderful stories that make your heart happy and smile. And don't we all need that these days? Yes, we do. David, welcome to Curves Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me, Susie.
It's my pleasure.
By the way, everyone, I write under the name David Ward, W-A-R-D, but Susie's given you my real name, which is great.
That's right. My pen name is Susie as well. That's my middle name, but I go by two names myself. It can be confusing sometimes. Wait, who am I today? No, I'm just kidding. So, David, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I can. I'm retired now, and normally I'd be splitting my time between Spain and the UK. But of course, because of the virus, I'm totally in the UK and have been for over a year. I started work in London local government back in the early 60s. And during that time, I trained and got ordained as a priest in the Church of England, which is a bit like the Episcopal Church in the United States. I worked in parishes for about 20 years and then moved into the work that I really loved most of all, and that was hospital chaplaincy. And during that time, I was working in an acute hospital with people with cardiac failure, renal failure, and generally acute stuff. Also, during that time, I got involved with a home for people with severe learning disability. And there would have been about 50 or 60 people in that home, spread over about 10 bungalows on a big site we had at the time. And that was tremendous, a big learning experience. After that, I spent some time as a semi-pro singer in London and Spain for about 8 years. And now, as Susie's told you, I'm working as an author, and I'm really looking forward to getting my second book out this summer. I've got short stories that have been published in the UK and Spain, and I have been happily married now for 40 years, more actually, 41 pretty soon. And we've got 3 children and more grandchildren than I can count, or I can't count that far.
Oh, that sounds so wonderful, David. Oh my goodness. You have such a nice, rich sounding life full of adventure, full of family, full of love, and just a journey. That's such a wonderful journey.
It's been eventful.
Yes. And I'm sure that during this eventful life that you live, there's been some ups and downs, which we are here today. Yes, we are here today to talk about really the aspect of taking the high road. And that can be a very difficult concept for people, because it's not an easy thing to take the high road when you do deal with these ups and downs in life, especially if you feel like you've been wronged in some way, or it's hard to understand the other person's point of view, or sometimes our egos get in the way as well. I mean, that's been my problem in life, where when I find myself at that crossroads of having to take the high road, my ego gets in the way, and it's that defense wall that goes up and says, wait a minute, I've got valid points here. I'm right. They're wrong. And in order to be able to move past those really terrible emotional feelings that kind of behavior brings on, whether you're right or wrong, that actually is very devastating to our well-being and
Mm.
it really holds us back from moving forward in life. So given your rich, colorful history of all the experiences that you've had that you just talked to a little bit about, you gave us a briefing of them. Can you give us an example of a time in your life when you've had to take the high road and what that was like?
Yes, I can. I could give you a load of examples because I'm a priest, I'm actually ordained to take the high road. Part of the vow that we take is to support all that's fine and fair and oppose all that's mean and destructive. And that's a big, big vow. And it takes us through life. You know, that's part of what we are and what we do. But I'd like to give you a specific example, and it comes from my singing days, actually. And it's fairly recent, about 3 or 4 years ago. I was in a group of three singers, another guy, and a girl, well, a woman, who, let's call her a woman, uh, who was the manager of a care home. And the county council here that controlled that particular care home really was wanting to close the home down to save money. It also saved them money if they could get rid of this particular individual without paying any redundancy. That would have cost about £25,000. Well, they found a reason to do that. And I'll call her Rachel. That's her name anyway. She won't mind. Um, and Rachel came to me, having been dismissed, to ask me if I'd take the case on at her employment tribunal. Well, I did, and we had a preliminary case to answer and to work out with the solicitor for the county council. We met the judges, and then we moved on from that for about a year, studying employment law, which is something I knew nothing about at all. So I was really starting from scratch. And during that time, we got in touch with our local newspaper, and we got a very interesting sort of report put in there. They got in touch with the BBC's local radio station, who took the case on, but they even went further by contacting the leading news and current affairs radio station on the BBC. We call it BBC Radio 4 here. And they took the case on too. So we were not only fighting the case, but we were recording information for radio programs. The radio program then took us into television, and we ended up on one of the magazine programs that's a big favourite over here, again on BBC television. The case itself became more and more complex. It was a 3-day case, which apparently is quite a long time for an employment tribunal, and it was exhausting. The council had not only got a solicitor against us, but had employed a barrister. And well, to cut a long story short, we won on a technicality. It was a technicality, but we did win, and Rachel got a few £1,000s, nothing much at all. But what she did get was early retirement as well as part of her deal. So we sort of won, but it really was a case of taking that high road, doing what seemed to be right and proper for Rachel, and the strain was costly. It cost both of us a lot of mental strain.
Yeah, I would say that it sounds like mental strain is definitely one of those unfortunate byproducts of
Yes, it is.
when you have to face something difficult, when you take the high road. What would you say was the biggest lesson that you learned from taking the high road?
The biggest lesson. Ooh. First of all, I think that the high road can very quickly become the high wire. And instead of having your feet firmly on the ground, suddenly you're in a place where you may fall and there's danger around. and anxiety and criticism and a lot of negative stuff. Secondly, I think you have to come to terms with the fact that you might well be dealing with people who have very low moral standards. I had to stand against a drug addict once who was trying to peddle drugs to people. And again, you're dealing with people who are, yeah, have low morals. I think it can seriously affect your health, your mental health and physical health too. The lessons, good support's needed, trusted friends, trusted advisors, and I'd say never take the high road lightly. Uh, you've got to really work out if you're the right person to take it, if it comes your way.
I'm curious because when I think of the high road, I think of I've had a situation in my past where with friends, I've had a couple of situations where I've had to swallow my pride in
Yeah,
order to move forward in life, even if I didn't believe that I was wrong. I had
yeah,
to, I guess, own up to the idea that the other person also thought that she was right.
mhm,
And it takes a lot of mental anguish and a lot of mental strength to be able to look in an objective way at a situation where you are deeply involved. In the case that you were deeply involved in Rachel's outcome, Rachel was deeply involved in her outcome, to look at this situation in an unbiased, objective way and to be able to look at both sides of the story. And I think that's that high wire you're talking about too, where you can be empathetic and understand someone else's side. You might not
mhm.
agree with it, but it's being able to, what the thing that I grappled with and struggled with the most in that situation was taking that overpowering feeling that I was right and she
Yeah,
was wrong, and being able to say, to look at the situation and say, okay, maybe she was right about, we're all justified in our feelings and in
yeah,
our own opinions because that we're free to have our own opinions and our own feelings. And so I had to really step outside of myself, my own feelings, my own defense walls, and say, what is really at stake here for
mm,
her, not for me? And that was to me, the big lesson is being able to say, what is at stake for her in this
mhm,
situation?
yeah,
Not for me. Because the minute we start thinking, what's at stake for me, those defense walls go up again and no progress can be made. And
yeah,
I do believe in the idea that there are two sides to every story. I'm not talking about if there's extreme cases of abuse and crime and all of that stuff. That this is not what I'm talking about. So anybody who's listening who says, "Well, this isn't always the case," I'm talking about. I want to say, and I don't mean to call it superficial, but things that are not ethically or morally wrong, where it's one
yeah,
side is
yeah,
obviously wrong with crime or with ethics or morality, but more so just two people have an argument or a disagreement, or somebody gets fired and somebody in a company, feels they were justified in that decision, those kinds of things. So, yeah, for me, the biggest lesson was, and the hardest lesson was stepping outside of myself long enough
mhm,
to be able to see that what was the other person's point of view. And when I could see the other person's point of view, I was able to address the situation from that
yeah,
angle. And then coming at it from that angle, we were able to, her defenses fell down and we were able to come
mhm,
to a common ground where we both felt we were heard at that point. Because I don't think you can hear another person or they can hear you if your defense walls are up or, if you're in that fight mode.
yeah.
Mhm.
I think there's always a lot of grey areas around, and it's important to recognise that that's what they are.
Yeah.
No, nothing's too black and white, but um, sometimes the people who are opposing you, perhaps on the high road, are taking a very black and white attitude.
Yes, that's right. And
Um,
and
how do you fight that?
oftentimes,
How do
yes.
you fight that?
That's right. And I think that the answer to that is you can't control somebody else's viewpoint or feelings. But if you are truly taking the high road in this situation, it's almost like a responsibility we take on to ourselves to help that person through this situation as well, so that you can both come to that point where you are in that gray area and you can see and agree that there is a gray area. It's not a black and white, hard left, hard right, or there is a common middle ground, and that's where progress is made. That's where forgiveness is granted. That is where moving on is possible. Without that middle ground, that gray area, it's one fight against another fight, and it could go on for, you know,
Yeah.
eternity.
I mean, I think in Rachel's case, it really was a black and white thing, and we were really at each other, and we couldn't do it any other way. We honestly couldn't, because we were clearly not going to meet common ground at all.
Yeah,
Um, that's why we were at a tribunal, because we couldn't.
because you couldn't. Right. That situation obviously is one of those more serious situations that I was kind of referring to, where
Oh yeah.
what I'm talking about is more, friendship based or relationship
Okay.
based.
Yeah.
You don't need a tribunal necessarily. It's more like everyday life. People
Yeah.
listening here aren't necessarily going to be facing tribunals, hopefully, in their near future. But everybody does at one point come to points in life where you are
Oh yeah.
facing that high road, whether you're
Yeah.
going to take it or not.
Yeah.
And so, on that vein, what would you say to someone who is struggling to take the high road in a tough situation?
I would say, first of all, make sure you've got personal support, and that there's people you can talk to yourself and feel comfortable with. Uh, I'd say seek expert advice where you need it. And in Rachel's case, for example, we had to find expert advice wherever we could. There's no legal aid here much anymore. So really, we had to make our own. Um, I'd say also make sure that you switch off sometimes and just go out and have some fun. Every time we met up, Rachel and I would discuss the case for the afternoon and then have a couple of drinks in the early evening and maybe a meal, just to switch off and be normal again. Um, I'd say certainly have someone to probably monitor your stress levels if you're dealing with a tough situation, and your own mental health too. Because we're not always aware of our own danger levels, are we? We don't quite always know where we are ourselves. So someone out there, a wise sort of friend, is pretty important. And then to ask, I think, whether you can see the beginning, the middle, and the end of things. If you've got somewhere you're aiming for, if you can see how you might get there and how it all started. Those sort of questions are pretty important ones to answer, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Wow, that's really great advice. Really great tips there, because I think when someone is in a situation where they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, they need
Mm.
these little tips, these pieces of advice, these little tips that can help them through. And sometimes it's the simplest step forward that can help a person feel like they have some kind of power within themselves to be able to live their best life and not feel so drowned in the muck, getting stuck in the muck, as they call it here, of the problems, or the overwhelming burden of these problems, the emotional toll that it can take. So that was really helpful what you just said.
Yeah, good.
Now, in terms of what do you think the benefits of taking the high road are? And conversely, what do you think the risks are of somebody not taking the high road?
Well, I think probably the main benefit of taking the high road as a matter of habit is that you can live more easily with your conscience, and you're going to have a reasonably clear conscience about things instead of wondering, well, maybe I should have done, I could have done better, whatever. And you'll meet some great people along the way as well. I think that's a big benefit. And in Rachel's case, we certainly did. We met some wonderful people and I'm still in touch with lots of them. The risk of not taking the high road, I guess it's about blame. That you have to, if you don't do something, you can live with the feeling that you should have done it and blame yourself and just go round and round in circles with what ifs. And that's no good to anyone.
Those what ifs are great if they're leading to empowering answers, but the what
Yeah,
ifs of dread and regrets, those are not self-powering. That is not going to do anything for you but make you feel terrible about yourself and relive the past, and that's never going to be helpful to relive past mistakes if you
no.
don't learn something from them. That is.
However, I must admit that I'm living with what ifs about Rachel's case, even about 4 years on. I still think, oh, what if we'd done that? What if we said that? It would have been better. But that's life. That's me.
Well, and I think that that stands testament to the fact that you are a caring person and that you you think about people's well-being above your own sometimes. And in this case, you worry about Rachel, you worry about how your actions affected or inactions, if there were any, affected her. I think that is completely natural. I feel like any stand-up person would worry about that because you care about
Mm,
them.
yeah.
But I do feel like you can get stuck in that muck if you do think too much about, shoot, I should have done this, I should have done that, because we both know, David, we can't go back. We can only move, we can only go forward or stay put.
Mm,
And we're never
yeah.
going to serve people. We're never going to bring value to the world if we're just staying put or reliving the past too much. But what I guess what can be said is if there was something that you think back on that you regretted, that you truly felt like you didn't do correctly, at least you can take that now as a lesson when you move forward. But
Yeah.
I seriously doubt that you didn't put your best foot forward. I am completely certain, knowing who you are, your personality, the gentle soul that you are, that you did everything you could for Rachel in this
It,
situation.
it was the best thing at the time. But if I ever did it again, I'd know better ways too. But I'll never do it again. It was far too tough.
Yeah, well, that's the lesson right there for you too. Is you have to take into consideration your life, your health, your well-being, and that of your
Yeah.
significant other too, because
Uh,
it affects everybody.
very important point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because I know from the radio programs that came out on BBC Radio 4 over here, I've got them all taped, obviously. There's one point where I didn't know I was being recorded, and it shows how down I was. I was just repeating things 3 or 4 times, and it just showed the stress that Rachel and I were under at that
Mhm.
point. And
Yeah.
I suppose I was under it as much as anyone because I was her spokesperson. I was the guy who was questioning and cross-questioning witnesses and talking to the judges. Um, it was a strange role, strange role.
Yeah, sounds stressful. I don't know that I would be the best person to be able to stand in such a role like that because there's a lot at stake. And knowing you and how you care about people, it doesn't surprise me that years later you're still thinking about recounting some of the things that happened or didn't happen and
Mm.
feeling regret over them. Regret is a hindrance unless it serves us for the future. So that would be my advice to you: is if you have any regrets, let it serve you and others in the future. Don't keep it as a hindrance because you're too bright of a soul for that to happen. Yeah.
Thank you.
So this has been a really great conversation about how to take the high road. In closing, do you have any lasting thoughts on that?
I think, first of all, the benefits of taking it, I've already given you. But say three tips. If I was giving 3 tips to people, I'd say, first of all, try to see what the issue is all about very carefully and share where it might take you. Um, Find someone to talk to about the possible outcome of all of the case that you're on, and then know your own skill and your own limitations. That's essential. And to stay human, you know, Rachel and I would have the whole day, as I think I've already said, talking about the case, and then we go for a meal, switch off. And it's important to be able to switch off and do normal things like, the washing up after a meal or something like that, or just listen to some music. Just do something like that. I've got other things I'd like to share actually before we
Absolutely.
wind up. A few tips, maybe, if anyone out there was in a situation where it may be stressful to take the high road. First of all, I'd say read some autobiographies. There are some great ones around because these will show you people who are talking about when they've taken the high road and sometimes hit the low road too, fallen off the high wire maybe. Um, I just read Barack Obama's The Promised Land, A Promised Land rather, not the A Promised Land. And that gives a clear idea of working at that level, whether you agree with him or not. I love music, as you know, and another great autobiography is I Am Brian Wilson, from the guy who was a founding figure of the Beach Boys. And that's interesting because it shows some of the pressures he was on and how he's had to take the high road back in his life. And another one would be another author, Stephen King. His book on writing, it's just called On Writing, isn't meant to be an autobiography, but there's a huge chapter in there called CV, and that's where he talks about some of the things that have shaped his life. And it becomes very clear how he's managed to get onto the high road at all and what it's been like to take it. And it's also very, very funny. You wouldn't think so, perhaps being Stephen King, but it is. It really is very, very funny. And I've just read it for the second time. Another thing I'd say is let go of your failures. And I'm the worst person in the world at doing that. I'm still thinking about Rachel's case and thinking, I should have done this. We should have picked that up. But you have to try and let go of it. And then be curious. Be imaginative, be ready to meet some of life's curveballs, as in your terms, the curves in life. Be ready for them because there'll be plenty getting thrown at you. So, yeah.
Boy, is that the truth. There'll be plenty of curveballs. That's
Yeah.
like one of those guarantees that's right up there with death and taxes. That you're going to have some curveballs in life.
Yeah.
And you just
Yeah,
you have to roll with the punches, as they call it. I loved Stephen King's book on writing. I've read it several times myself. It's like the Bible of writing for me, and I agree with most everything he said in that book. And he does have humor in it. He actually wrote one of my. I didn't realize that he wrote this, but he wrote The Shawshank Redemption, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. I've watched it 20 times or so, and I get something new out of it each time. And so that surprised me when I learned that he actually was the one who wrote that. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. Anyway, so everything you just said was so wonderful and inspiring, and I really appreciate those tips. Stay curious is one of my favorites because if you are not curious about life and about how you view life and how you would, I don't want to say attack life, but how you journey through life, if you're not curious, it's going to be a boring road. And life is so short, life is so beautiful, it's worth being adventurous and it's worth all the joys. And one of the best kept secrets of having a joyful life is staying curious about it.
I like turning over a few stones and seeing what's underneath.
Yeah, that'd be a great title to a book. Turning over the stones.
That one, please.
There's that could be your third title.
No, I got my third.
Well, that's true. All right, your fourth title. David, how can people connect with you?
They could always email me, and my email address in small letters is WOLS 58159 as one 5-digit figure at gmail.com. And I'm always pleased to answer people on there. I'm on Facebook as David Walford, but I'm also on, and this would be the better way, as David Ward, author.
Excellent.
And each word would have a capital, start with a capital letter there. Also, Goodreads. I've got a Goodreads authors page, and there's room on there to ask questions too.
Excellent.
So I'd love to hear from people. It's good to.
Excellent. Well, I just want to say this has been an enlightening conversation. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I always enjoy our conversations, and I always feel more at peace and happier after I get done talking with you. So thank you so much for that. And I'm sure that my listeners are feeling the same way right now. You've given some wonderful pieces of advice, and you also opened yourself up to vulnerability by sharing your story and your feelings about it, which I think is an authentic way to live. And I completely respect and love that, because it resonates with me when somebody can admit that they don't have all the answers, but they're seeking them and they're staying curious about them. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hey friends, thanks for spending time with me today. I hope you enjoyed today's topic. If there is something you'd enjoy exploring in a future podcast, please reach out to me via my website at curveswelcome.com and I'll work it in. While you're there, grab a free story too. It's my way of thanking you for your support of my podcast and romance novels. Also, be sure to follow the Curves Welcome podcast channel to keep up on the latest episodes. So thanks for tuning in. Until next time, go out there and continue to learn, grow, and embrace life's curves.